The bustling streets of the city were alive with energy as Marcus Johnson, the mayor, stepped out of the community center. He had just wrapped up a successful event aimed at promoting new initiatives for racial equality, a cause he was deeply passionate about. As he walked through the throngs of constituents, Marcus felt a warm wave of optimism wash over him. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue on the faces of those he had just spoken to. People greeted him with smiles, and he reciprocated with a nod and a few words of encouragement. "Thank you for your support, everyone. Together, we can make a difference," he said, raising his hand in a wave as he made his way to his car. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the air, but beneath it lay a current of tension that only Marcus could sense. He was aware that not everyone shared his vision, that not everyone welcomed the changes he was advocating for. Yet, he remained undeterred, believing firmly in the power of community and collaboration. As he reached his car, a sleek black sedan parked just outside the community center, Marcus paused to take a deep breath. The weight of his responsibilities often felt heavy, especially when the stakes were high. He climbed into the vehicle, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror. Just as he was about to start the engine, a couple approached him, their faces bright with excitement. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring you the best content possible. Continuing, Mayor Johnson, we really appreciate everything you're doing for our neighborhoods. It's about time someone stood up for us, one of them exclaimed, his eyes gleaming with hope. Thank you. Your support means the world to me. Change is coming, and it's going to be for the better, Marcus replied, his voice steady and passionate. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him as he drove off, leaving behind the warmth of the event. But as he navigated the crowded streets, the atmosphere shifted. The joyous chatter faded into a sense of unease, and Marcus found himself lost in thought, contemplating the challenges that lay ahead. Meanwhile, in the cramped confines of a patrol car, Officer Tom Reynolds slumped in his seat, discontent simmering beneath his stoic facade. He adjusted his cap as he glanced out the window, watching the pedestrians pass by with a mix of indifference and frustration. It was just another day on the job, but a lack of action had left him feeling restless. Man, this city is going to hell, he muttered, directing his disdain towards a group of young black men who were laughing and joking on the sidewalk. Look at them. No wonder it's a mess around here. Those people don't know how to behave. His partner, Officer Lisa Chong, shot him a disapproving look. Come on, Tom. That's not fair. They're just having a good time. It's not their fault the city is struggling. Yeah, right. You know how it is. They get a little freedom, and all hell breaks loose. Tom shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. Lisa sighed, shaking her head, knowing that arguing with him was futile. As the minutes dragged on, Tom's irritation grew. The radio crackled to life, reporting mundane incidents across the city. He felt a sudden urge to assert himself, to remind everyone of his authority. Just then, his gaze caught a flash of black paint against the backdrop of the setting sun. A sleek sedan that seemed to stand out among the rest of the cars. That one, he murmured, squinting to get a better look. That guy's driving all suspiciously. Let's check him out. Lisa reluctantly nodded, bracing herself as Tom flicked on the siren, the blaring sound slicing through the conversations on the street. As they approached Marcus's vehicle, he felt a thrill of anticipation. There was something exhilarating about pulling someone over, especially someone who looked like they didn't belong on the streets. Tom parked the patrol car behind Marcus, his heart racing with a mix of adrenaline and superiority. He glanced at Lisa, who was already shaking her head, clearly uneasy. Just let me handle this. Marcus, unaware of the eyes scrutinizing him, was busy adjusting his tie and checking his phone when he noticed the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. Confusion crossed his face. He wasn't speeding or doing anything wrong. What could this be about? He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm, and turned off the engine. Tom stepped out of the patrol car, his demeanor exuding authority. He walked toward Marcus's sedan, his hand resting on his belt, a habit he had developed over the years, as if to remind everyone of his badge. "Sir, do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his tone clipped. Marcus rolled down his window, a polite smile gracing his lips. "I'm not sure, officer. I wasn't speeding and the traffic was light. Your driving was suspicious. You were swerving a bit," Tom replied, leaning in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Can I see your license and registration?" At that moment, Marcus felt a wave of tension wash over him. He had no idea who was behind the wheel of the patrol car, but he sensed an underlying hostility. "Of course, officer. Just give me a moment," he said, reaching into the glove compartment to retrieve the documents. As he fumbled through the papers, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was about more than just a traffic stop. He caught a glimpse of Tom's partner, Lisa, who was standing back, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Everything okay over there?" she called out, but Tom waved her off, too caught up in his own authority to acknowledge her concern. "Just a routine check," he replied dismissively, but the tension in his voice was palpable. With the license and registration in hand, Marcus handed them over, trying to keep his composure. "I'm Marcus Johnson, the mayor of the city," he stated calmly, looking directly into Tom's eyes. Tom's expression shifted, but he quickly regained his composure. "That doesn't change the fact that I saw you driving suspiciously. You're going to have to answer some questions." "Questions about what exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, yet laced with the hint of an impending confrontation. Tom leaned closer, the scent of cheap cologne invading Marcus's senses. "Just answer the questions and we'll see how this goes." As the tension mounted, the busy street continued to buzz with activity around them, oblivious to the brewing storm between a mayor and a police officer. In that moment, Marcus realized that this was not just a simple traffic stop. It was a confrontation that would challenge the very essence of authority, prejudice, and justice in their city. Little did he know, the events that would follow would change everything. As Officer Tom Reynolds approached Marcus Johnson's vehicle, the tension in the air was palpable. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the asphalt, and the sounds of the bustling city faded into the background. Tom, with his uniform crisp and his demeanor hardened by years of ingrained prejudice, stepped up to the driver's side window. Marcus, seated inside, felt his heart race with a mix of apprehension and indignation. He had been pulled over for simply driving home, yet here was a man who represented authority, and he was about to wield it with all the weight of his bias. "License and registration," Tom barked, his voice a mix of authority and disdain. He leaned slightly towards the window, his body language aggressive. As Marcus reached for his wallet, he decided to take a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. He understood the game they were playing. "I need you to step out of the vehicle," Tom added, his tone brooking no argument. "Officer, I'd like to inform you that I'm the mayor of the city," Marcus said, his voice steady, though he could feel the tension in his muscles. He held out his identification, hoping it would ease the situation. "I was attending a community event just now." Tom's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the ID but quickly dismissed it. "Doesn't matter. You were speeding back there. I clocked you at 35 in a 25 zone," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You're going to have to step out of the car." The dismissal of Marcus's position as mayor ignited a spark of anger deep within Marcus, but he knew he had to choose his words carefully. "Officer, I assure you, I was not speeding. I was driving within the limits. Perhaps there's been a mistake," Marcus replied, his tone calm but firm. He shifted slightly in his seat, trying to gauge Tom's reaction. The officer's rigid stance suggested he had no intention of backing down. "Look, just because you wear a fancy title doesn't mean you get to break the law," Tom shot back, his voice rising. He seemed to relish the authority he wielded, a reflection of his deep-seated biases surfacing in the heat of the moment. "I'm not going to let some politician think he can get away with anything just because he's in office." Marcus felt the anger boiling within him, but he fought to keep it at bay. "I understand you're just doing your job, officer. But I would appreciate it if you'd acknowledge who I am and treat me with the respect that comes with this position," he said, his voice more assertive now. He could feel the weight of the encounter shifting, though Tom remained unmoved, his expression a mask of stubbornness. "Respect is earned, not given," Tom spat, crossing his arms defensively. He leaned closer to the window, his face inches from Marcus's, and Marcus could smell the faint hint of coffee and stale cigarettes on his breath. "And right now, you're not doing a very good job of earning it." Feeling the walls closing in around him, Marcus realized that this confrontation was escalating dangerously. "I would really like to resolve this peacefully. Can we please just talk this through?" he implored, maintaining eye contact. He was aware of the power dynamics at play, but he refused to be intimidated. Tom's eyes flickered momentarily, as if weighing his options. "You think just because you're the mayor you can sidestep the law? This isn't how it works," he replied, his voice low and threatening. "I could take you in for resisting arrest if you don't comply." "Resisting arrest? I'm not resisting anything. I'm simply asking you to reconsider this situation," Marcus stated firmly, his voice imbued with authority. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, and for a moment, he contemplated how he could turn the situation in his favor. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He reached for his phone, which lay on the passenger seat. He had seen too many similar incidents unfold on social media. Too many officers abusing their power. Too many innocent people subjected to unwarranted aggression. Perhaps documenting this encounter would serve as a safeguard for him. "Do you mind if I record this? I think it's important to have a record of our conversation," Marcus said, his fingers poised over the screen. Tom's gaze hardened. "You think you can just pull out your phone and record me?" he challenged, his voice harsh. "That's not going to fly. You're escalating this situation." Marcus felt a surge of determination. "I'm not escalating anything. I just want to ensure that this is documented, for both our sakes. You're a public servant, and I'm a public official. There should be transparency in our interactions," he argued, hoping to appeal to whatever sense of duty Tom might possess. "Fine, but if you record me, I'll have you arrested for obstructing justice," Tom threatened, crossing his arms tighter across his chest. The threat hung heavy in the air, but Marcus stood his ground. "Obstructing justice? I'm afraid that's a stretch, officer. My only intent is to ensure accountability," Marcus countered, feeling the resolve within him strengthen. He activated the recording, his heart pounding as he did so. "I hope you understand that I'm doing this for the sake of transparency." Tom's face shifted, a mixture of irritation and anger flashing across his features. "You're just trying to play the victim here," he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "You think this is going to help your image? You think people will side with you over a dedicated officer?" Marcus shook his head, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "This isn't about my image, officer. It's about the systemic issues we face in our city. It's about accountability, and it's about making sure that no one, regardless of their position, is above the law," he replied, his voice steady. The words hung in the air, resonating with a deeper truth he hoped would penetrate Tom's armor of prejudice. For a brief moment, Tom hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his features. But the moment passed, and he squared his shoulders, determined to assert his authority. "You're just another politician trying to play the race card. You think you can intimidate me with your title? You're wrong." Marcus felt the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon him. This was no longer just an encounter between a mayor and a police officer. It was a battleground for justice and integrity. He resolved to stand firm, knowing that the outcome of this moment could ripple through the community in profound ways. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone, officer. I'm simply asking for fairness. But if you're unwilling to engage in a respectful dialogue, then perhaps it's you who needs to reconsider your position," Marcus replied, his words filled with conviction. The silence that followed was thick with tension, both men locked in a stalemate. Marcus could sense that the balance of power was shifting. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, fueling his determination to challenge the status quo. Tom, however, remained steadfast, unwilling to yield to a man he perceived as a threat to his authority. As the recording continued, Marcus realized that he was no longer just a victim of circumstance. He was actively challenging the very foundations of the biases that had long plagued their city. In this moment, he was not just the mayor. He was a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. Marcus Johnson held his phone steady, the camera lens trained on Officer Tom Reynolds. The blue glow from the screen illuminated his face, capturing every nuance of the escalating confrontation. As the recording began, he felt an unexpected surge of empowerment. He was no longer just a victim in this situation, but a witness to the injustice unfolding before him. "Why are you recording me?" Tom barked, his voice rising in pitch, reflecting the rising tension of the encounter. The aggressive demeanor he had donned was becoming more pronounced, and Marcus could sense the underlying fear that often accompanied power unchecked. "Because I'm documenting this interaction," Marcus replied, his voice calm and measured. "I have the right to record." He held the phone up a little higher, ensuring the lens captured both his composed demeanor and the officer's escalating agitation. Tom's jaw clenched, and he took a step closer, the air between them thick with hostility. "You're just trying to be a smartass, aren't you? You think you can just disrespect me and get away with it?" His words dripped with condescension, and Marcus felt the weight of his authority pressing down. "I'm not disrespecting you, officer. I'm merely trying to ensure that this interaction is fair and transparent," Marcus responded, his tone steady despite the storm brewing around them. Tom's eyes narrowed, and his fists clenched at his sides. "You want to play games? I can play too. Maybe I should just arrest you for disrespecting an officer of the law." He leaned forward, invading Marcus's personal space, a tactic designed to intimidate. Marcus took a deep breath, grounding himself in the reality of the situation. He was the mayor. He had a responsibility to confront this injustice, not only for himself but for the community he served. "Arrest me for what? Exercising my rights? This is a public road, officer. You pulled me over without cause." The words hung heavily in the air between them, and for a moment, Tom hesitated. The bravado he had been exuding faltered slightly as he considered the implications of escalating the situation further. Yet, the arrogance that had propelled him thus far reasserted itself. "You think you're above the law just because you wear a fancy title? I'll show you what happens when you disrespect authority." As the confrontation intensified, a crowd began to gather at a distance. Bystanders, initially drawn to the spectacle of a police stop, began to murmur amongst themselves as they caught snippets of the argument. Marcus noticed a familiar face among them, a young woman named Sarah, a longtime community activist who had been vocal about police reform. He silently willed her to step forward. "Hey!" Sarah called out, breaking through the murmurs. She stepped closer, her stance defiant. "What's going on here? Why are you harassing the mayor?" Tom turned to her, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "This is none of your business, miss. You need to step back." "It absolutely is my business," she shot back, her voice steady and clear. "We've had enough of this kind of treatment. You're supposed to protect and serve, not intimidate and harass." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope as Sarah's presence shifted the dynamics of the encounter. He glanced at her, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you stepping in," he said, keeping his gaze steady on Tom. "Stay out of this, lady," Tom warned, his voice low and threatening. "I'm the officer here. You have no idea what you're getting into." "I have every idea, officer. This isn't just about you and the mayor. This is about every single person who has ever been targeted by your kind of prejudice," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. "You're making a mistake." Tom's bravado began to wane, the presence of the crowd weighing heavily on him. He could feel the eyes of onlookers boring into him, a palpable tension radiating from the gathering. The weight of their judgment pressed against him, and for the first time he hesitated. "Look," Marcus interjected, sensing the moment of vulnerability. "I'm willing to resolve this calmly. Let's just talk about what's happening here, officer. There's no need for further escalation." His voice remained calm, a stark contrast to the anger simmering within him. Tom's brow furrowed, and he took a step back, attempting to regain some semblance of control. I'm not the one escalating here. You're the one recording me, trying to make a scene, he snapped, but his words lacked conviction. I'm trying to ensure accountability, Marcus replied, his resolve strengthening. Isn't that what you're supposed to be doing as an officer? Protecting the community and upholding the law. Don't lecture me about the law. Tom shot back, but the aggression in his voice was beginning to falter. He looked around, noticing the faces in the crowd, the questioning glances, the phones raised, capturing the moment. Every second felt like an eternity, and he could sense the tide turning against him. Look, officer, Sarah said, her tone now more conciliatory, we're not trying to undermine you. We just want to ensure that everyone is treated fairly. This isn't about titles. This is about justice. The crowd had grown, murmurs of support echoing through the air. Yeah, let him go, someone shouted. Stop harassing the mayor, another voice chimed in. The mounting support from the crowd began to chip away at the veneer of authority Tom had built around himself. His confidence faltered, and he took a step back, glancing around nervously. This is a mistake, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Marcus seized the moment. Let's de-escalate this, officer. I'm willing to drive away and forget this ever happened if you can acknowledge that this stop was unfounded. No harm done. His voice was steady, but inside, his heart raced. This was a critical juncture, and he needed to navigate it carefully. Tom shifted his weight, his bravado crumbling as he weighed his options. He was no longer just dealing with a single individual. He was confronted by a community that had witnessed his behavior. You don't understand, he said, his voice low and shaky. I have a job to do, and part of that job is to protect the citizens of this city, not intimidate them, Sarah countered. We're not your enemies, officer. We want to work together for a better community. As the crowd murmured in agreement, Tom looked at Marcus, then at Sarah, his mind racing. The walls he had built around his authority were crumbling, and he found himself at a crossroads. He could either double down on his pride or step back and acknowledge the truth of the situation. Fine, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Just go. Marcus nodded, relief flooding through him. Thank you, officer. I appreciate your understanding. He turned to Sarah, gratitude evident in his eyes. Thank you for stepping in. I couldn't have done this without your support. As Marcus drove away, he felt a sense of empowerment coursing through him. The recording would serve as a powerful reminder of the encounter, and with the community rallying behind him, he was more determined than ever to address the systemic issues that plagued their city. The air was charged with change, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt hopeful about the future. The tension in the air was palpable as the crowd began to gather around the scene. A few curious onlookers had whipped out their phones, eager to capture the unfolding drama. Among them was a middle-aged woman with a determined expression and a camera aimed squarely at Officer Tom Reynolds, who was struggling to maintain his composure. Do you know who you're messing with? The bystander, a local teacher named Angela, exclaimed as she stepped forward, her voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. This is Marcus Johnson, the mayor. Tom's face fell as the realization hit him like a slap. The bravado he had been clinging to began to crumble. He glanced nervously at Marcus, who remained calm, his expression unreadable. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. The officer's mind raced. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, judging, waiting for his next move. Yeah, I know who he is, Tom said, his voice strained and defensive as he tried to regain control of the situation. He took a step back, hands on his hips, attempting to project authority despite the vulnerability creeping into his posture. But that doesn't change the fact that he was driving suspiciously. Suspiciously, Angela scoffed, crossing her arms. He was leaving a community event for racial equality. You're just harassing him because of the color of his skin. Marcus took a deep breath, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He decided to seize the moment. You see, he began, addressing the crowd, this is exactly what I've been talking about. Racial profiling isn't just an abstract concept. It's a daily reality for many people in our city. I'm the mayor, yes, but I'm also a black man who has faced this kind of treatment before. The gathered crowd murmured in agreement, their eyes glued to Marcus, who had transformed from a target of unwarranted suspicion into a figure of resilience and authority. We cannot stand by and let this continue, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Every time someone is pulled over for no reason other than the color of their skin, it diminishes our community. It erodes trust, creates fear. Tom shifted uncomfortably, the weight of Marcus's words pressing down on him. He could feel the crowd's energy shifting, the tide turning against him. This isn't what it looks like, he attempted to assert, but the conviction in his voice faltered. Then what is it, Officer Reynolds? Marcus pressed, his tone composed but firm. What is it that you see when you look at me? Because it's clear you didn't see the mayor of this city. You saw an opportunity to assert your power. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Tom's bravado dissolved further. He was losing control, and he knew it. I'm just doing my job, he shouted. But the defiance in his voice was overshadowed by the growing disbelief among the onlookers. Doing your job? Angela shot back, her voice laced with incredulity. Your job is to protect and serve, not to intimidate and harass. You're abusing your authority. The word abuse hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus glanced around, registering the expressions of the crowd. Some were nodding in agreement, others had expressions of shock. He could feel the shift in momentum, the palpable sense that they were witnessing not just an encounter between a police officer and a citizen, but a larger commentary on systemic issues that plagued their community. I'm not going to let this slide, Marcus continued, his voice steady. This is a call for accountability. We need to have a discussion about what's happening in our city and how we can do better. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been unjustly targeted. Tom looked around, sensing the crowd's growing hostility. He felt cornered, like a rat trapped in a maze. I think we're done here, he muttered under his breath, the words barely escaping his lips. He turned slightly, his body language betraying his desire to retreat from the spotlight that had suddenly fallen upon him. Done? You think this is over? Marcus challenged, stepping forward slightly. If you think you can just walk away from this, you're mistaken. This is a moment for change, and I won't let you dismiss it. But Tom, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him, took a step back, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape route. You're not going to make a scene here, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. I'm not the one in the wrong. Then why are you so eager to leave? Marcus asked, his tone calm yet piercing. If you believe you were justified, why not stand your ground? Why not answer for your actions? Tom's jaw clenched, the reality of his situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He could feel the eyes of the crowd boring into him, and for the first time, the power he had always wielded felt like a burden. Because I have a job to do, he finally said, the words sounding as hollow as he felt. Your job is to serve and protect, Marcus reiterated, his voice rising. You're not serving anyone by perpetuating this cycle of fear. You're not protecting anyone by acting like a bully. The crowd began to chant softly, a mix of support for Marcus and disapproval of Tom. Justice, accountability, change, they called, their voices growing louder as they rallied around the mayor. Feeling increasingly isolated, Tom turned on his heel and walked briskly back to his patrol car, his face flushed with humiliation. The gathering crowd watched in silence as he climbed into the vehicle, slamming the door shut as if to shut out the reality of the situation. As he started the engine, he glanced in the rearview mirror to see Marcus standing tall, flanked by supportive members of the community. The defiance in Marcus's stance was a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play, a reminder that he could no longer rely solely on his badge for authority. The sound of the engine roared to life, but it was drowned out by the shouts of the crowd. Marcus took a moment to breathe, absorbing the gravity of what had just occurred. The incident was already beginning to spread across social media, with witnesses posting videos and comments about what they had just witnessed. In that moment, He knew this was more than just a personal confrontation. It was the spark that could ignite a movement. The tide was turning, and he was ready to ride the wave of change. The crowd began to disperse, but not before Marcus took a moment to thank those who had stood by him. "Thank you for your support," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "This isn't just about one encounter. It's about all of us. It's about demanding respect and accountability. Together, we can make a difference." As the crowd began to disperse, the reality of what had just happened settled in. The incident was bound to have repercussions, not just for Tom Reynolds, but for the entire police department. Marcus felt a sense of hope mixed with determination. He had turned the tables, not just for himself, but for countless others who had faced similar injustices. With his phone buzzing in his pocket, he knew it was time to take action. The battle for justice was far from over, and Marcus Johnson was more than ready to lead the charge. Marcus Johnson sat in his office at City Hall, the weight of the recent incident pressing heavily on his shoulders. The late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room, but the light offered little warmth. Instead, it felt like a spotlight, illuminating the stark reality of what had happened just hours ago. He could still hear the echoes of the crowd's murmurs, the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he faced Officer Tom Reynolds on that fateful street. The phone on his desk rang, breaking the tense silence. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up, steeling himself for the inevitable backlash. "Mayor Johnson," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Marcus, it's Greg," came the voice of his chief of staff. "We need to talk about the fallout from today." "Yeah, I figured," Marcus replied, running a hand through his hair. "What are they saying?" "There's a lot of chatter on social media, and some of the local news outlets are picking it up. People are outraged, but not just at Reynolds. They're questioning your administration's commitment to police reform." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I need to turn this around. We can't let this incident define us, or worse, derail the initiatives we've been working on for racial equality." "I agree," Greg said, his tone serious. "But we need a plan. You have to address this head-on. If you don't, it'll only fester." "Let's call a press conference," Marcus decided, his mind racing with possibilities. "I want to talk about systemic racism in law enforcement and outline our next steps for reform. We can't let this be just another incident that gets swept under the rug." "Okay, I'll set it up. But Marcus, just be careful. Reynolds has his supporters, and they'll be looking to discredit you." As they ended the call, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He would not let fear guide him. He would turn this moment of adversity into a rallying cry for change. He stood up, looking out over the city from his office window, imagining the community he could help build. A place where everyone was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin. Meanwhile, Officer Tom Reynolds sat in his car parked outside the precinct, staring blankly at the dashboard. The incident had blown up in a way he never expected. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, each one a reminder of his failure. His partner, Officer Mike Daniels, who had remained silent during the altercation, finally broke the tension. "Tom, you need to get ahead of this. The news is already running with it. You can't just hide out here." "I'm not hiding," Tom snapped, his voice laced with frustration. "I just need to think. Think about what? About how you're going to spin this. Because right now, it looks like you racially profiled the mayor, and it's not going to go away," Mike replied, his tone firm but concerned. Tom clenched his fists, the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I didn't know he was the mayor. I was just doing my job." "He was acting suspiciously." "Come on, Tom," Mike said, leaning forward. "We both know there's a difference between acting suspiciously and being targeted because of the color of your skin. You can't say you're colorblind and then pull over someone just because they're black. That's not how this works." Tom turned to glare at him. "You don't understand. It's not just about him being black. It's about the way people act. You've seen it. They know what they're doing when they see a cop. Or maybe they're just trying to live their lives without being harassed. Look, you need to figure out how to fix this. Otherwise, it's going to affect all of us," Mike warned. As the two officers argued, A small group began to gather outside the precinct, holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "End Racial Profiling." The tension in the air was palpable, and Tom felt a tightening in his chest. He had never been one to back down from a fight, but he also knew that the ground beneath him was shifting. Meanwhile, Marcus was in the midst of gathering his allies. He had called for an emergency meeting with community leaders and activists to discuss the incident and formulate a strategy for the press conference. The room was filled with a mix of familiar faces and new allies, all united in their desire for change. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Today's incident with Officer Reynolds isn't just about me. It's about all of us who have faced this kind of injustice. We can't let this moment pass without taking action." "Agreed," said Tanya, a local activist known for her fierce advocacy. "This is our chance to shine a light on the systemic issues within the police department. We need to demand accountability." "Exactly," Marcus said, nodding. "I want to address the community directly and let them know we're working on real reform. But we also need to gather testimonies and support from those who have experienced racial profiling. We're building a case." As the group discussed their plans, Marcus noticed a sense of solidarity in the room. They shared stories of their own encounters with law enforcement, each tale a thread woven into the larger narrative of systemic racism. The passion in the room ignited Marcus's resolve. He felt empowered, ready to take on the fight. "Let's also reach out to the media," Marcus suggested. "We need to ensure our message is clear and gets the coverage it deserves. This isn't just about one officer. It's about a culture that needs to change." Just then, an aide rushed into the room, her face pale. "Mayor Johnson, I think you need to see this." She handed him a tablet displaying a live stream from outside the precinct. Tom Reynolds and his fellow officers were gathered, and the conversation was tense. Marcus leaned in closer, his heart racing as he tuned into the discussion. "Look, we can't let this get out of hand," Tom was saying, his voice low but urgent. "We need to find a way to discredit him before this spirals. We can't let the mayor paint us as the villains." "What do you mean, discredit?" "He's the mayor," one officer interjected, incredulous. "I know, but if we dig into his past, we might find something, anything, to turn the narrative. This is about survival. We can't afford to look weak," Tom insisted, his eyes darting around as if he expected someone to overhear. Marcus's stomach dropped as he realized the gravity of what he was hearing. Tom wasn't just trying to save face. He was plotting to undermine him. Anger surged through him, but he quickly tempered it with determination. This was not just a fight for his reputation. It was a fight for justice, for every person who had been wronged by a system that favored those in power. "Did you hear that?" Marcus said, turning back to the group. "We need to act fast. Tom Reynolds is trying to discredit me, and we can't let him get away with it." "Let's expose him," Tanya said, her voice fierce. "This is our chance to hold him accountable and show the community that we won't tolerate this kind of behavior." Marcus nodded, feeling the energy in the room shift once more. "We'll gather our evidence and present it at the press conference. This is bigger than just one encounter. It's about changing the entire narrative surrounding policing in our city." As they finalized their plans, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready to fight, ready to stand up against the injustices that had been allowed to persist for far too long. The time for change was now, and he would not back down. In the dimly lit office of the police chief, the air was thick with tension. Officer Tom Reynolds sat slumped in a chair, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a heavy fog. He stared blankly at the wall, replaying the confrontation with Marcus Johnson in his mind. The indignation he had felt, the rush of power, seemed distant now, overshadowed by the imminent consequences of his behavior. Across the desk, Police Chief Linda Harper looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and concern. "Tom," she began, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk about what happened during that traffic stop." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her gaze. "Look, I was just doing my job. The guy was acting suspiciously. And I..." "Acting suspiciously?" Linda interrupted, her tone rising slightly. "You pulled over the mayor of our city for suspicious driving. You know how that looks, right? You can't just throw around your authority like that, especially not when it's motivated by prejudice." Tom clenched his jaw, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "He was disrespectful," he snapped. "I was just trying to maintain control of the situation." "Control?" Linda leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You escalated it, Tom. You've done this before, haven't you? I have reports of similar incidents. This isn't an isolated case." The accusation hung in the air, and Tom's heart raced. Those were different circumstances. This was just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Linda shook her head, disappointment etched across her features. "You were caught on video. The public is outraged. The community is demanding accountability, and I can't ignore this. We have a systemic problem, and you're part of it." As the reality of his situation dawned on him, Tom's bravado began to crumble. He could lose everything. His badge, his job, maybe even his freedom. He took a deep breath, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "I'll make it right," he said, his voice shaky. "I'll apologize. It's too late for apologies," Linda interrupted, her voice cold. "We're placing you on administrative leave pending an investigation. You need to understand the gravity of what you've done." Tom's stomach churned as he processed her words. "You can't be serious. This is a setup. I was just doing my job." "This isn't a setup, Tom. This is accountability. You need to reflect on your actions and the impact they have on the community." Linda's expression softened slightly, but she remained resolute. "I hope you take this time to think about your role in the department and the trust the community places in us." With that, she dismissed him, and Tom stood, anger boiling inside him. He stormed out of the office, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. The weight of the world felt like it was on his shoulders, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control. Meanwhile, just a few floors down, Marcus Johnson stood in an expansive conference room, preparing for the press conference that would follow the events of the past few days. He glanced around at the gathered media, their cameras flashing like fireflies in the dim light. The energy in the room was electric, a palpable mix of anticipation and urgency. "Mayor Johnson, can you comment on the situation with Officer Reynolds?" a reporter called out, cutting through the buzz. Marcus took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. "I want to thank everyone for being here today. This isn't just about my experience. It's about the systemic issues that plague our community. We need to have an honest conversation about racial profiling and the culture within our police department." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident. Many people have faced similar encounters, and it's time we address it head-on. We need change, and we need it now." As he spoke, he could see the journalists leaning in, their pens flying across their notepads. Marcus felt a surge of determination course through him. This was his moment to advocate for justice, not just for himself, but for all those who had been silenced for too long. "Today, I'm calling for a thorough investigation into Officer Reynolds' conduct and the practices that allow such behavior to persist within our police force. We need accountability, and we need to ensure that our officers serve and protect all citizens equally," he continued, his voice rising with passion. The room erupted in questions, but Marcus held up a hand, signaling for silence. "I will not be intimidated or silenced. We will not stand by while systemic racism continues to harm our community. Together, we will fight for justice, for equality, and for a future where every person is treated with dignity and respect." As he concluded his statement, applause broke out among the gathered supporters. Marcus felt a wave of hope wash over him, knowing that he was not alone in this fight. The community was rallying behind him, and the momentum was shifting. In the days that followed, the fallout from the incident continued to ripple through the city. Social media buzzed with a mix of outrage and support, and Marcus used every platform available to amplify the call for change. He hosted community meetings, engaging with residents and listening to their experiences. Each story he heard fueled his resolve to push for reforms in the police department. Tom, on the other hand, found himself isolated. As the investigation unfolded, whispers circulated within the precinct. His colleagues who once stood shoulder to shoulder with him now avoided his gaze, and the camaraderie he had taken for granted evaporated. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a vice, and he struggled to find a way to redeem himself. One evening, as he sat in his dimly lit apartment, Tom's phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend, a fellow officer who had always supported him. "Hey man, heard things are tough. You can't let this ruin you. We'll figure something out." Tom stared at the screen, torn between the comfort of his friend's words and the reality of the situation. He had always believed in the thin blue line, but now he felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, uncertain of where he would land. The day of reckoning arrived when the police chief announced the findings of the investigation. The conference room was packed with reporters, cameras rolling as Linda prepared to address the public. "Today, we face a challenge to our integrity and our commitment to serve our community," she began, her voice steady. "After a thorough investigation, it has been determined that Officer Tom Reynolds engaged in conduct unbecoming of an officer. As a result, he has been placed on administrative leave, and we will be implementing further training and reforms to address the issues of bias within our department." The news sent shockwaves through the city, and for Marcus, it was a victory. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, knowing that his efforts had not been in vain. The crowd erupted in applause as he stood in solidarity with the community, their voices rising in unison. As the press conference concluded, Marcus stepped outside to face the gathered supporters. "This is just the beginning," he declared, his voice strong and unwavering. "We will continue to fight for justice, for accountability, and for a future where our community is safe for all. Together, we will create change." The sun shone brightly as he looked out at the faces of those who had stood beside him during this tumultuous journey. Hope flickered in the air, and Marcus knew that, although the road ahead would be challenging, they were ready to walk it together. If you liked the content, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share it with your friends. Your comment is essential for the growth of the channel. And look at this video that appears on the screen. See you soon.